Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? There's a woot. Will I see you at Niagara Brewery tonight? All right. If for those of you that didn't make the cut, just show up. We don't turn anybody away, but we're having a little Ignite session tonight with some of the wonderful friends and colleagues from all across Ontario at Niagara Brewery. So it's going to be a great 3 hours of quick 5-minute talks from people way smarter than me. So come check it out at 7 o'clock tonight at Niagara Brewery. My name is Brian Aspinall. I'm from Windsor, so I'm taking full credit for bringing the heat because it's been spring for about a month in southern Ontario, so you're welcome for that. I'm sorry for those of you in Thunder Bay who couldn't make it. Colleen, I think, is one because of that crazy ice storm, so that's just crazy to me. I want to begin with a story. One of the greatest teachers I've ever had in my life was my late grandfather. He taught high school chemistry in Sudbury, Ontario. He actually taught Randy Carlisle, which is kind of cool. So when I was a kid, my parents would put us on the train in Windsor, and they would send us up to Toronto at March break time, and it was kind of a vacation for everybody, right? Myself, my brother, who would come with me, and my parents. So he used to teach us about mixing chemicals because he was a chemist, but he was also a geologist. So we looked at, fool's gold and pirate's gold and all that stuff, and I absolutely loved it. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's around 2009, and it was really devastating to me because I didn't know a lot about the disease, but I knew that our relationship was going to change in some capacity. I mean, doctors are throwing all these pamphlets at us, and I'm trying to read all of this material. But the reality is I constructed my own knowledge of Alzheimer's by experiencing it and by living it. There was no textbook out there that could have prepared me for the interactions and how they had changed with Papa. So a lot of my work in education is about that. It's about constructing your own knowledge by building models and kinesthetic activities, because I think that we learn from experience. We learn from the tangible, hands-on experiences. And now we live in a world where I can visit him like I did when I was 13. I can open Street View and I can stand on the sidewalk, and I can look at his house just like I did when I was 13 years old. But what's fascinating about this, today's technology is the worst technology our students will ever use, and yet in some classrooms we still ban it, we still fight it, and we still put it away. Right? Do you remember the Commodore 64? That was a wicked piece of technology back in our time. Well, that's what we're talking about with today's Surface Pro tablets. That is the worst piece of technology our students will ever use. So how do we truly embrace that? Because access to information is so quick now, how do we create a generation of independent thinkers? I teach grades 7 and 8, so when kids come to me, they want to know what to do to get the grade. And the second I don't post success criteria, I get emails flooded from parents trying to figure out how this thing's going to be scored. And I don't want it to be a game. I don't want it to be this place where kids play school in order to get a score, and who got the highest score, and it becomes this competition. And, how do we motivate a C student if their best work is a C+? I certainly wouldn't want to go to school and continue to learn if I was constantly told my best work was never good enough. In 2005, I started my first after-school coding club. I value play in education. Go ahead, take it in. Yes, that is a pooping baby. In 2005, I started an after-school coding club, not because I was super progressive, but because I studied computer science, and we teach to our strengths, and that's all I knew. Ironically, it's worked out quite well for me. But in 2005, these boys approached me on the playground. I was a grade 5 LTO, thinking I have no idea how I ended up here, coming out of university, but I did. And they said, we hear that you're like this coding guy. Like, can you help us make a game? And I said, yeah, of course I can. So I went down to the principal's office, and I said, I would really like a contract, and the sports teams already have coaches, so I got to do something extracurricular so that I can make a lot of attention so people look at me so I can get a job. So I'm going to start an after-school coding club. And I remember the principal going, I have no idea what you're talking about, but okay, have fun as long as it engages our young people. And I thought this will be fantastic because this is an opportunity for the more non-athletic students in our school to be engaged in some of the things that I want to share with them. But what's so fascinating about the story to me is that Scratch is old. It was developed in 2003 under the premise of passions, projects, peers, and play. Now, in 2005, it didn't exist in the cloud like it does today, so we had to actually download this thing. And I remember these boys, they said, Mr. A, can you beat the firewalls? I said, yes. Can you? They said, yes. So I downloaded Scratch, and we put it on USB keys, and we made this train down the computer lab there, and we were installing it from USB, trying to circumvent all the blocks that were in place. We hid the shortcut to the app itself so that it wasn't seen on the image, and we had sort of a little underground Scratch cult going on in the computer lab. So now think of the context. It's 2005, I'm an LTO trying to get a permanent gig, circumventing IT, alongside students who want to make a shitstorm game in the computer lab after school. Lambton Kent hired me. I got permanent the very next year. I'm sitting beside these boys, and I said, boys, how did you make this baby go back and forth? I don't understand. I wrote a whackload of syntax in the 6 years I spent getting my 4-year degree. I wrote a lot of Java because Sun Microsystems was the sponsor of the University of Windsor. So sitting there, I said, I don't understand this. It's like Lego, and you link all this stuff together. Raise your hand if you're a Scratch user. I don't have to share too much about Scratch. That fascinates me. If I'd asked 5 years ago, there might have been one hand. And now it's like the thing, right? It's 14 years later since it came to fruition. They said, Mr. A, it's easy. You put when green flag, click, change X by 1. Okay, run. I'm like, wow, it worked. That's cool. How did you make it go all the way to the end? They said, we have to put it in a loop. I thought, that makes sense. I know all about that stuff. I understand loops and things. So I put it in a loop, forever change X by 1. I click the green flag, and the baby goes all the way to the side of the screen, and it just stopped. And I kept pulling it back and letting it go just to watch it. And I said to them, not once did I ever write a Java program and have it work the first time through. This is friggin' amazing. It did not crash. It did exactly what I wanted it to do. This is so simple. I said, boys, you realize that I have $20,000 in debt learning what I just showed you in a matter of minutes? In fact, you just showed me in Scratch 3 years out of my undergrad. I said, this is really cool. How did you make it go to the left? I don't see turn around. I don't see go backwards, things like that. They said, Mr. A, you're really killing us here. Like, it's forever change X by -1. And at this point, I'm going, oh, my God, we're using geometry to create a game. And I said, I'm afraid to ask, but could you tell me about the poop missile algorithm? I would appreciate it if you tweet that. Hashtag CanConnect17. I'm serious, I'm storifying it. Hashtag poop missile algorithm. I'll wait. Tweet it, poop missile algorithm. So they said, Mr. A, it's simple. The poop missile is tracking the baby's location, and it just shows up there, and then it flies to the bottom of the screen. I said, let me paraphrase what's actually going on here. Because at this point in my career, I'm basically trying to memorize the curriculum documents so that I can pass any interview question they throw at me. I said, okay, you have a baby at a constant Y position, translating back and forth by changing X from positive to negative. If it touches the perimeter of the screen, it's reflecting. The poop missile is always tracking the baby's location. I'm at positive 300, I'm at negative 300, okay, I'm on my way. It plots itself at that location. It translates to the bottom of the screen with a forever change Y by -1. If you catch the poop protecting the city from a shitstorm, you get points that you store in variables. I didn't say storm. They said, yeah, exactly. I thought, holy shit, pun intended. You just did like 8 geometry curriculum expectations here in Ontario. Can I mark this? Should I mark this? Can we talk about this? We could then, but I didn't have a document called Growing Success, making it okay to quantify our conversations. So I went home, I said to my wife, I said, okay, I don't know what to do. I'm pacing in the living room, I'm sweating to death. She's like, sit down and have a beer. What's wrong? I said, I got all these lessons planned tomorrow with the textbook. Like, if I break out a bucket of mirrors, all heck is going to break loose after this experience. So I got on the computer and I started looking up things. And I learned about this guy, Reggio Emilia. Raise your hand if you know Reggio Emilia, right? He's a cool dude, right? Reggio Emilia is a city, not a dude. Reggio Emilia is a city in Italy under the guidance of Laurice Malaguzzi, who's a child psychologist. They started looking at play-based learning after World War II, so decades ago. the notion of what we call passion projects or Genius Hour today, they were doing full-time a long time ago and sort of reevaluating the way that they were evaluating kids at school by focusing on good descriptive feedback. So through learning about Reggio Emilia, I started to research Jean Piaget again. I thought, this is oddly familiar. I feel like I read his name once in a book in one psych course I took in university, which is incredibly ironic, because Piaget was known for coining the constructivism learning theory. That is, we learn through experience at certain stages of life. Ironically, in my university experience, I was told to read about the constructivist learning theory and then go fill in bubbles for 30% of my final grade. After I learned about Jean Piaget, I read his quote there that says, "No one understands my ideas as well as Papert." And I thought, I need to meet this Papert. Who is this Papert? Raise your hand if you're familiar with the work of Mr. Seymour Papert. Clicker, let me down. There we go. Raise your hand if you're familiar with the work of Seymour Papert. Hands up high, own it. Look around the room, maybe a fifth. That's pretty common. Nobody knows who this guy is, unfortunately. He passed away. The world lost Seymour Papert last summer in July. He was a bit of a disruptor. He made claims like, we don't go to the pencil factory to use pencils as a tool. Why do you have computer labs? Why is that a scheduled event? Why do teachers sign up the computer lab every other Friday afternoon, take a prep, and put kids on Math Circus? Guilty. Why do you do that? That's not a good use of time. That's not a good use of those spaces. And I'm fascinated by the work of Seymour Papert because he was way ahead of his time. He wrote Mindstorms in 1980, and if you didn't know the year it was actually written, it would sound like he's talking about learning commons by today's standards, but he would also say, don't make a maker space, and then put it on a calendar, timed, scheduled event. It should be accessible at any time so that kids can go and use those tools. Reggio Emilia says that the environment is the third teacher, and so that's what should happen in learning commons and in makerspaces. Seymour Papert was using robots long before robots were sort of cool. There's about 13 Dash and Dot and Sphero workshops happening here at Connect this week, and so he was doing this 30 years ago, but he was doing it purposefully. He believed that if kids could demonstrate spiral graphs and looking at geometry and repeating patterns, and they could program a robot to draw something based on a script or a procedure or an algorithm, then they had demonstrated mastery. He believed he would have kids do kinesthetic activities like, if you want to find the perimeter of this room, you should walk it yourself, use footsteps as the unit of measure. And if he could get on the computer, or they could get on the computer and make the robot do the same thing, that they had demonstrated an application of knowledge. This is what's really fascinating to me because we're talking about Scratch today. Are you familiar with Logo? Raise your hand if you're familiar with Logo. So you are familiar with the work of Seymour Papert. Seymour Papert created the first block-based coding language at MIT Media Lab in 1967, and he called it Logo. And he believed that kids should learn, he was a student of Piaget's, and he liked the constructivist learning theory, but he tweaked it a bit. He said people of any age can learn through experiences. And I'm going to show you how you can make those experiences really rich. And so here's what he did. I'm going to give you an example of equilateral triangle. You can only use these commands. These are the commands that make the turtle move. As the turtle moves, it draws a line behind it, okay? So he says, I want you to make the turtle draw an equilateral triangle. Well, in the physical space, he's already got one taped out. And so they're having a conversation about the properties of an equilateral triangle. So I'll put that out to you. What are the properties of all equilateral triangles? Math is hard. Same angles, same sides, and what is the sum of all interior angles of all triangles, for that matter? 180 degrees, and because it's an equilateral, we've got 360 degree angles. Great. So he'll say to the kids, okay, we're going to use forward 50. How many forward 50s are there going to be in your procedure, in your algorithm, in your module, in your script? And of course, they would say 3. There's going to have to be 3 side lengths. And he would say, great, so we're going to do forward 50 first. What's the very next command? And feel free to shout it out if you think you know. Turn 120. The kids in his class would say turn 60. And be honest, how many of you thought immediately turn 60? So what he would do then is he would put them back on the equilateral triangle and he would say, walk that side length. Now turn your body to go back down the other leg. And of course, they would do this. And he would say, was your turn obtuse or acute? Let's have that conversation. Of course, the students would say, well, it felt bigger than 90. And so what Pappert's work showed us way back then is what we call spiraling today. He was teaching supplementary exterior angles as a byproduct of this process. All he wanted to do was teach the properties of an equilateral triangle, but have the kids construct it by walking it first and then making the turtle do it. And they had to realize, he brought out the big wooden blackboard compass, right? Would put it on the floor and say, how big is that turn? And they went, oh, that makes sense. So 180 degrees is a straight line. Oh, okay, that's fascinating. Now, if you're familiar with the work of Mitch Resnick, are we? Mitch Resnick was a student of Seymour Papert. He created Scratch at MIT. So you can see the continuum here now. So the work of Scratch and everything that, all the research around pedagogy at MIT starts with Papert's work. And it actually doesn't finish with Mitch Resnick. But Mitch Resnick is a little bit of a disruptor himself. He says things like, if you can learn to code, you can code to learn. He's got a really famous TED Talk where he talks about coding being a new language. And not that every kid's going to be a professional programmer, but it is a new way to communicate to a global audience and to do some really cool things. Now, Mitch Resnick, of course, being a professor at grad school at MIT, also has students. Little Bits came from MIT, and Makey Makey came from MIT. Under the guidance of Mitch Resnick, Eric and Jay took to Kickstarter to pitch creating a hardware device that will allow you to make physical circuits in the physical space to interact with your pooping baby game in Scratch. They wanted to create the layers so that there's a natural differentiation, this natural scaffolding, so that when you're creating circuits and you're connecting it to Makey Makey, they can be as simplistic or as challenging as you want them to be, like series circuit or parallel circuit. But now we're inquiring about what conductors are first before we can interact with the Scratch content that we make. So Mitch Resnick said, this is the world in which we live. You have an idea. Let's go ask 1 million people for $1. And this was their pitch. Everybody laughs at this one. Remember Tom Hanks' big mall scene? We did this in the front foyer.
Hi, I'm Jay.
And I'm Eric. We're graduate students at MIT Media Lab.
We have a dream that everyone is an inventor.
So we created Makey Makey to let you invent just by alligator clipping. Alligator clips stuff like bananas to your Makey Makey. When you touch the banana, your computer just thinks you're touching the keyboard. The front has arrow keys, spacebar, and mouse left click. When you're ready for more, flip the Makey Makey over and you've got more keyboard keys and support for the mouse. You can even use the board like an Arduino when you are ready. No programming, no breadboarding. You don't even have to install software. Just plug it in USB.
Order your Makey Makey today and start changing how the world works.
So I backed it, and I bought a bunch of Makey Makeys, and I showed my class this video, right? Grade 7 and 8. What do you think they said? Can we play Mario? Because grade 7 and 8s just want to do what they saw. They don't want to think outside the box. They just want to take what was done there, and they do it. And I thought, okay, well, I've got them hooked anyway, so let's do this. So we march down to the art supply room, and we get out the clay, and we come back on the table, and Remember, I teach grade 7 and 8, so I'm looking at the 7s going, I know you took circuits in grade 6 science. I know you did. No, Mrs. So-and-so didn't do that. I'm like, don't lie to me. I know you did it. We're going to build these circuits. We're going to connect the Makey, and we're going to look up Mario, and we're going to play Mario, and we've got about 5 Makey's across the front table. Not one of them worked. I thought, what is going on? There's no way these are all lemons. Like, that's just not mathematically possible that I would get 5 dead boards. So I'm like trying to figure out what's going on, and everybody's frustrated now. And of course, there's that one student expert that's like, your circuit's wrong. I'm like, the circuit's right. The circuit is right. I don't know what's wrong. We go home. Another student comes back the next day with Play-Doh, and he says, let's try this. And sure enough, Play-Doh worked. And I thought, this is true guided inquiry. Guided inquiry in a classroom means we don't really know what the solution is. But we're going to do this cool project, and we're going to come to what might be a solution. And so we started to try and inquire why Play-Doh would work and why clay didn't, and my students started to blog about it. All of a sudden, I had recount, and we were summarizing, writing explanations, writing procedures about why Play-Doh worked and clay didn't. And it has to do with the salt content. Salt makes name-brand Play-Doh a conductor, and the clay in our art supply rooms was not. So now we're inquiring about other conductors. How come older nickels work better than newer ones? Well, there's less nickel in new nickels. There was more nickel in older nickels. Now, the term computational thinking, which is something we were definitely demonstrating that day, the term computational thinking is kind of a buzzword now by today's standards. I open social media, and I'm like, oh, there it is again, eating away at my 140-character limit. But the term was actually coined by Jeanette Wing in 2005. She wrote a scholarly article for dudes. Like big font, like double spaced, like big font. I was like, I can do this. I can read this thing. I highly recommend you check out her article about computational thinking from 2006, where she says, this is no longer a skill for computer scientists, but society at large because of the Internet of Things. If you're going to drive a vehicle, you should have some sound understanding as to how to put air in the tires or check the oil. Well, it's going to be no different now, because by 2020, we're going to have more objects connected to the internet than people. Think about a kid's pencil case, whatever that metaphorical pencil case looks like in 2020. How many of the objects in that pencil case will be tracking the behavior of that student sitting at a desk? If they're sitting at a desk. Hopefully we evolve past the beanbag chair stage to something else, but they'll be sitting there, and data will be tracked all the time. So Jeanette Wing says computational thinking is the synergy of the human mind and the machine. If people can think like a machine, they can use it to their advantage, to the fullest potential, to solve problems. If we understand how machines work, we can create more machines, and machines can now create other machines on our behalf when we get to that point. At this conference, coding seems to be a massive theme. But the reality is, in about 10 years, software will write software. We just need the generation to create that. So that's why coding is so hot right now. I came across this Venn diagram in my work studying at Western about computational thinking and mathematical thinking, and I think that this screams volumes to me because traditionally this is something that we would evaluate here on the left in a math classroom. In a lot of ways, EQAO looks at some of that stuff. We have to rebrand how we define a good math student. Good math students traditionally have been defined by a recall of facts in a timely manner. We would put kids in rows and spout out multiplication, and they had to solve multiplication tables quickly. And if they could say it fast, they were considered good math students. We have to rethink that. We have to rethink quantifying math education based on the number of correct scores and look at quality feedback. We have to figure out how we can keep kids moving and wanting to learn. Because if a student gets 21 out of 30 on a math test where they had to find the area of 30 circles, I'm pretty confident that they demonstrated mastery 21 times and then got really bored in those other 9 experiences and made computational errors. It wasn't that they didn't understand the process of finding the area of a circle. So Jeanette Wing defines computational thinking as simulating, data mining, automating, games, robotics, coding, a lot of the themes we're talking about here. But the reality is we need to find the intersection and put kids at the sweet spot. Everybody loves this picture. I can't take credit for it. It was a scholarly article that I read. High school science teachers in the US created this idea. But what fascinates me as an intermediate teacher, I look at things like gaming, and that was something I always banned in my classroom. When I graduated from the faculty, I was told, intermediate teacher, you run a tight ship. To me, that meant quiet, compliant rows. Now, my definition of compliance has changed. I still think my students are compliant, but they're not necessarily in quiet rows. But I also think just because my classroom's loud, it doesn't necessarily mean good things are happening. I'm very conscientious of that stuff. But there was a time where the level of volume in my classroom indicated whether I had good classroom management skills. So something like gaming was something I would fight. Put away Clash of Clans. Anybody play Clash of Clans? It's kind of old now, right? Anybody besides Joe Archer? Clash of Clans is one of the best games to teach financial literacy. Go look at the Ontario document for Clash of Clans. Because Clash of Clans, you have to accrue gold, elixir, dark elixir. If you upgrade your walls in real time, it uses gold, which is easy to get when you go steal it from your neighbors. But if you want to upgrade your wizard hut, it takes like 6 days in real time, uses dark elixir, and that's really hard to find. So I create this classroom clan to engage some of the students in my class. And here we are playing Clash of Clans outside of the classroom. And in a little chat box, I'm trying to teach ROI. I'm like, why did you do that? Tell me why you upgraded your wizard hut and not your dragons. Why did you do that? And we would start to have all these conversations about financial literacy in that game. And I thought, this is so powerful. But what's even cooler about the story, I said to my principal, I said, you really, really need to put us like on some kind of showcase for community engagement, because that was the theme in our school district, was reaching out to the community. So I got to tell you, my clan is like 50 members deep, because all the boys in my class, their dads joined too, and we made an army. We had a massive Chatham-Kent Clash of Clans army, and who doesn't love games?
Buffet Boy 85. But if you think you can humiliate me and take my gold, think again. I'm coming for you with lots of barbarians and dragons. I can't wait to destroy your village while you beg for mercy. But you will get no mercy. I will have my revenge.
Liam? Have a scone for Liam?
Over here. It's, Liam. Regret the day you crossed Angry Neeson 52. Angry Neeson 52.
A couple of years ago, I put this growing pattern up on my smartboard, and I had said to my students, I want you to use your words, and I want you to describe this growing pattern. And that's how bad of a teacher I am. I already told them the pattern was growing. I said, describe this growing pattern. Describe this pattern. So feel free to shout it out. It's a growing pattern. What else? It's a linear growing pattern. Grows as a constant. What is that constant? Great. Grows at 4. There is a constant of 1 in the middle, I would think. What would be the algebraic equation for this growing pattern? 4x plus 1. Fabulous. So this is ultimately where I wanted to get with my class. All right, okay, we make this table of values, we come up with the pattern rule, and I was still in that space where math was right or wrong. And if you were wrong, I could quantify that, and I wasn't moving into my quality feedback yet. I wasn't ready for that. And there was a girl at the back of my class playing on her phone, and she was a bright student. Rebecca was her name, and I knew that she was totally listening, and I let her have that sort of extra stuff on the phone because she sort of needs that, right? And she puts up her hand at the end of the lesson, and she says, Mr. A? I said, why are you shaking your head at me, Rebecca? I don't speak head. And she says, Mr. A, you said, how do we see this pattern growing? I don't see it growing like that. If I see it growing another way, am I wrong? And here I'm going, uh-oh. Well, yeah, of course you're wrong. There's only one right answer. And see, that's the problem with math through a traditional lens, is there's only one right answer. And we need to get to that right answer. So she says, Mr. A, I got something to show you. And she comes to me with her phone, and she comes to me with a piece of paper with a table of values. Because our students live in 3D land, and I live in 2D land. And I thought, oh my God, Rebecca, you just blew my mind. Because the old school me, teaching the growing pattern thing here, there's one right answer. I went home, I said, oh my God, there is an infinite number of ways to extend that growing pattern now. Infinitely. So what changed in my practice was, instead of that one-size-fits-all where there's one growing pattern, I said, get out the linking cubes, get out the Minecraft, get out whatever. I put another flat 2D pattern, growing pattern, on the smartboard. I said, build it however you see. Make a table of values, make an algebraic equation, and then come and talk to me about it. What I realized through that process is that I completely scaffolded the lesson without intending to do so. The students in my classroom on an IEP, even a modified program, they could build a pattern. It might have been a simplistic pattern, but they had demonstrated mastery of the curriculum expectations outlined in their IEP. 91. I don't know how to mark that, right? But then I've got the Rebecca profile. She's building really elaborate patterns. She also has an algebraic equation. She also has a table of values. Every student in my class demonstrated that curriculum expectation. And as an intermediate teacher in Ontario, we have to put actual marks on a report card. And that becomes a challenge. But not just that part of pedagogy that shifted for me in terms of creating what Western calls wide walls, low floor, high ceiling, multiple entry points, kind of a task where there's more than one solution to allow all learner abilities to feel success. The spatial sense that came from this. If you read research about spatial reasoning, particularly the document that our ministry put out last year, it says students with a strong spatial sense will yield higher mathematical thinking later in life. And this is an example. I said to Rebecca, at least we agreed on the constant of 1. Rebecca? Here's the thing. I've given talks to large groups of students, and I've said to them, raise your hand if you've used Minecraft in class. And a lot of hands go up now. It's very common that as a great tool to engage and invest learners. And I would say to them, okay, raise your hand if you hide things from your teacher in Minecraft. Well, how many hands do you think went up? Every friggin' hand was up, and the teachers are looking at me like, and I'm like, no, hear me out. We talk about spatial sense, the placement of objects according to other objects, and this is perceived depth, right? It's actually a flat place. But if a kid shows you what you've asked them to demonstrate in a task, and has also done this in the back end, who wouldn't want that level of abstraction? There's a lot of value there. We're only seeing the tip of the iceberg, so this is the part I have to give a 75 on, but this is what you really care about, and you're doing tenfold beyond what I've asked you to do, and I'm none the wiser. And it's the same thing with coding in Scratch. We just see that final product, and we need to consider the process. There's a reason we have math process expectations at the beginning of every grade in our document. Our ministry document says computational strategies 12 times. Our interpretation of the definition of that word has changed. When our document was written in 2004, it might have been electronic calculators. Today, it's this kind of stuff, right? But the document was written in such a way that we can tweak it as we need to tweak it moving forward. Here's another example. I had given students in my class a penny when the penny had gone away, and I said, I want everyone to make a T-chart. I have to teach you probability now. They said, what's probability? I said, flipping a coin. Oh, okay. So what should flipping a coin be? And by grade 7 and 8, they can pretty well say 50-50. Well, my curriculum says we're going to do an experimental probability, calculate the results, and then I'm going to try and convince you that if you did that a lot, it would be this in theory. It's called the law of large numbers. That's the intermediate curriculum. So I said, everybody flip a coin. I had 24 students in my class at the time. So everybody flip your coin one time. Don't say anything. Raise your hand if you got heads. How many hands do you think went up? In theory, how many hands should have gone up? 12 out of 24, exactly. So I would say that to them. Look, how many hands do you think are up? And they're like, I don't know, like half the class. I'm like, exactly. Why do you think that is? They're like, I don't know, because we're flipping a coin. Yes, that's exactly right. And then I would say, okay, I want everyone to flip their coin again. Raise your hand if you got heads. How many hands went up? Test. You're good. 6, because it can only be heads, tails, heads, tails. There's 4 possible outcomes, so that would be a quarter of the 24 students in my class. I put up the smart notebook timer because it was super engaging in those days. I even turned on the radio. I was like, I'm not just listening to music and art anymore. I'm going to turn it on in math class. And I turned on the radio, and I set the timer for 15 minutes, and I said, I want everybody to flip the coin 50 times, and then we're going to talk about it at the end. When I think back to that experience, I made really bad choices. I made really bad assumptions. I assumed everyone could flip a coin. I assumed everyone could flip a coin 50 times. I assumed everyone in my class could flip a coin 50 times within 15 minutes, which was not the case at all. But as this is happening, I'm walking around the room, rocking out to my classic rock, and I come over to the first table, and there's a group of students, and they said, we just want to read. And you know that profile, right? We had intermediate teachers here. You just can't put the book down, and you struggle with fighting that. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know, put the book away. We got to do other subjects too, but you're probably going to be an author later in life, so why am I fighting this? I don't know. Because we have to do 300 minutes of math a week. So I said, okay, well, what do you think will happen if you flip it 50 times? And of course, this group says, I don't know, it'll probably be like 24, 26. I'm like, could you at least try? I'll come back. You just talk about it, I'll come back. I go over to the next table, and this kid's like, he threw his penny at me, and he's showing me this little welt. I'm like, I got to fill out an accident report now. There's a little bruise right here. And then I go over here, and there's a kid with a Ziploc bag, and he's like, can I have your penny? There's no more penny. And he's trying to collect all these pennies, and he's on the verge of tears, and he's got this bag full of pennies. And I thought, this went way better in the Nelson guide I just read 10 minutes ago. Who writes those things, and what classroom are they in? Let's be honest, right? I wasn't ready to admit this didn't work. I was not ready to feel vulnerable. I wasn't in that place in my own pedagogy, so I let the stupid timer run out, and I lost complete control of this. It was a disaster. Talk about the level of volume, right? Imagine the principal walking by that day going, oh, Miss Ray must be doing something totally engaging because it's loud. No, it was not working at all. It was a gong show. At the end of the class, Gavin approached me. Wonderful Gavin, grade 8 student, IEP, Learning Disability Accommodated Program. Mr. A, I'm going to make you an app so you can teach that better next year. In that moment, I said, Gavin, if you don't get out of my face, I will choke you. Because that was right after the lesson tanked. The next day, I said, Gavin, let's talk about your app. Let's talk about your app idea. You might be onto something. What's going on? He said, well, you know, like back in September, we played a lot on Scratch, and you used to say to us, you know, you're teaching the Scratch tool because you have to understand the tool, and the tool's really hard. We're going to teach the tool before we can use the tool to teach curriculum, okay? We always said, you know, Scratch is a great place to do trial and error and immediate feedback and take a risk. And I said, yes, Gavin, it's true that sometimes I use you as a medium to change the system because I want you to go home and tell your parents I don't do grades, and I want to see what that's going to look like. He says, no, that's not what I'm talking about. You just showed us this Scratch thing where I can actually create stuff, and there's built-in functions. Like, remember when we were doing procedural writing about toast, and you said, write the algorithm for making toast, and all of a sudden it was fun again? I said, yeah. Well, I'm going to make the algorithm for coin flipping. I thought, okay, how are you going to do that? He said, under operators, there's a built-in function called pick a random. It'll pick a random number between two numbers. I said, yes, Gavin, we call that a range. Teachable moment. He says, okay, whatever. I'm going to pick a range of like 1 to 2. And I said, you're going to pick a range of 1 to 2. What do we call those? He says, numbers. I said, Gavin, will it return 1.6? He said, no. I said, it will only return whole numbers. 2 for 2. He goes, okay, whatever. It's only, I said, it's an inclusive range. It will return a 1 or a 2. He says, yes. And if it's a 1, it's heads. Else, it's tails. I went, oh my God. IEP, this kid is brilliant. Yes, let's do this thing, right? And he says, can I do it in math class? And I went, oh, I don't know. I'm at a place where I'm not ready to make that shift. I actually said to him, Genius Hours on Friday. Think about that. That's what I said to him. That's where I was. And that's okay. We have a saying at our school, it's okay to be where you are. It's not okay to stay there. That's where I was. And I wasn't prepared to let Gavin do something while the rest of the class is flipping real money or flicking a spinner the next day with a T-chart, right? Gavin's on an IEP, so Gavin has a SIA laptop. So what do you think Gavin is doing on his laptop when I think he's on the PDF version of the textbook? I'm actually fighting with him because he's wanting to do this in class. And I'm like, you can't. You got to do the other. You have to do the task from Nelson that has the rubric on it so that I can fill a mark book, Gavin. That doesn't make any sense to me, Mr. A, because this is all about math and I actually want to do math. Well, it turns out he did it at home, so he was doing homework without me actually assigning it. He comes in on Friday morning before the bell with all of his buddies. I said, what are you guys doing here early? You don't even like school. Like, why are you here? It's done and it works. So what do you mean it's done and it works? Turn on the smartboard computer, put it on the smartboard. I had a sip of coffee. I looked right at them and I said, you need to come back in 15 minutes. We know how long it takes for the smartboard computer to turn on. Right? So they come in at the bell, and I've got it up on the smartboard. And he says, click the green flag. So I click the green flag, and what you saw at the beginning is exactly what happened. And I said, Gavin, please explain to me what's going on. He said, it's picking a random number between 1 and 2. Every time you click the flag, it increments a flip variable. I said, you know what a variable is? Well, yeah, it's a placeholder. I thought, I can't wait till we get to algebra, because we teach math in a silo, and we're like, oh, it's April 1st, time for algebra. Everybody get out your output number sense away. We're doing algebra. He said, it stores in a variable. I thought, okay, cool, we're doing some algebra. He says, click it again. So I click it again. I start clicking it a few times. And I'm like, wow, this is actually really, really cool. Click. I feel powerful when I do that. So I'm clicking a few times. I'm clicking that green flag, and I'm watching these variables get tallied. And I said, we have a problem here. It's not 50-50. Oh, now it is. And I kept doing it, and it finished at 60-40, and I thought, Gavin, there's a bug. And I was tricking him. He said, what do you mean there's a bug? I said, it should be 50-50, Gavin. And he said, no. This is the experiment. And I went, oh. I said, what'll happen if I refresh the page and do it again? He said, you'll get different results. I said, oh. Gavin, you created a fair coin. And he's kind of looking at me. I said, you created a fair coin. If I had refreshed the page and I got this, and I'm having a conversation with Gavin in front of the whole class, because they're totally engaged in watching this. If I had refreshed the page and I had got the same results each time, there would have been bias. Oh, I'm on fire this week. There would have been bias, Gavin. You would have created an unfair coin. And he looked at me and he said, I can do that. And I said, how is that going to work? And he said, I'm going to change the range from 1 to 2. And I'm going to make it 1 to 3. And if 1 or 2 get returned, it's heads. And if 3 gets returned, it's tails. And I looked at him and I said, if we ran that experiment a lot, what would the results of that coin be? And he looked at me and he said, 66% heads. And I looked at him and said, 94. I kid, but I said, what does the turbo button do? Because again, we're looking at a product here, right? I had the observations, I made observations, we had a lot of conversations throughout this math process. This is that final product when it comes time for me to actually put a number on Gavin's report card in the probability box. I struggle with that. He's heading to applied. You can't give an applied-bound student an A. That's crazy. And of course, we all recognize that that's a satire in itself, and that's not the case. But as soon as we do, people start asking questions. Right? As soon as we do that, we send kids to streams in Ontario and high school where they're meant to be successful. But here I am in June at grad putting them on a grade 8 standard. And this is quite brilliant because Gavin's coin flipper made me change how I actually teach probability because he had to use variables to do it. I said, that's cool. You made the thing actually flip. Why did you do that? He said, well, I didn't want the app to suck. I didn't want to just see numbers changing. So I created the animation. I said, it looks like stop motion. How did you do that? Because it is stop motion in Scratch. He said, I just changed the costume and made it go up, and I put it in a loop, and it flips. And I said, how did you make it go up? And he said, I made Y positive. And I went, oh my goodness, we're talking about Cartesian grid now. Remember that when it comes time to report card season, that he demonstrated moving up on a Cartesian plane. I said, talk to me about the turbo button. He says, when you click that button, it's going to ask you to enter a really big number. When you enter that really big number, I am storing it in a variable that you don't see. Talk about spatial sense, abstraction. You don't see this variable. It's running in the background. And I duplicated all of my code, and I put it into a loop, and it loops that number of times. So why did you do that, Gavin? Well, Mr. A, you see, and Gavin's that grade 8 student I like to chirp. He's a bit of an athlete. The girls like him, so I like to give him a hard time. He says, well, Mr. A, I wanted to prove your theory of probability wrong. And I said, and? And he went, turns out you were right. When you flip a coin a lot, like this, it actually becomes 50-50 the more times you run the experiment. So I entered a really big number into his app, and I clicked go, and we watched the law of large numbers happen in real time. And I think back to when the Sammer model swept the world by storm, and everybody was redefining things we were doing in classroom. This is kind of that example where without Scratch, it was more challenging for me to teach theoretical probability. So now you're watching the law of large numbers actually happen, because he can flip a coin really fast in a short period of time. And I know he tested his app because he was telling me that if you refresh it, the results would be different. He wanted to prove it was truly random. And I don't know what better way a student can construct their own knowledge of a probability than by coding it as a simulator and talking about variables and talking about geometry. Now we have a lot of Rotary at my school. So these boys are asking to go to the bathroom, to get a drink, whatever, make up excuses to get out of other classes to come and see this thing. And that's when I learned that student engagement is no longer enough. That's when I learned that these boys were invested in mathematics. They had created something that what Paprick calls his Mathland, where they recognized math, and they created a product for me to use as a teaching tool in future years. Quantifying this process and product is a real challenge now. But that's where we're at, and I think that's where we have to shift. And I think before we can truly implement Makerspace and Learning Commons and all of that other stuff, we have to have real conversations about pedagogy and best practice, because we're no longer quantifying math the way we once were. Here's another example, because after all, this is beyond the hour of code. Having kids code an interactive map of Canada after looking at the map. There's a dot on my cursor, and it tracks the color. And it says, if touching blue, then say that province. And so now kids have a real fundamental understanding of the borders of the provinces and territories because they're doing some color detection. I've had students program the particle theory to demonstrate solid liquids and gases. This is an example of diffusion. So particles start in a highly concentrated area, and then they spread out with a random x and y. This required geometry to actually pull off. But now I've got students demonstrating the particle theory without giving me that bulleted list, right? I used to quiz them. What are the 5 bullets of the particle theory? Well, they're right there, and the kids had to use geometry to actually pull that off. By 2020, there'll be more qualified technology positions. I hear this all the time. It's all about jobs. It's not all about jobs. The reality is that there are going to be a lot of jobs, and there are not going to be enough qualified people to fill those positions. I'm about exposure, because kids don't know if they like broccoli until they try it. I want them exposed to computer science so they can make the choice if coding is something for them. But beyond just the narrative of jobs, we don't teach students to write under the notion of them all being professional authors. Now, I wish that were the case, but it's not reality. That's not why I teach computer coding. It's not about industry. It's about making them think, making them problem solvers, and making them risk takers. Because right now, without a coding curriculum, it's the one part of school that kids still sort of see as fun. When we attach a grade to something or provide that rubric, it becomes stressful. And that's what I'm very fearful about with coding. If that happens, sometimes we suck the fun out of things when we have to go back and do the reporting piece. By 2020, there will be more objects connected to the internet than people. That means your fridge will Snapchat you when the water filter is dirty. Your stove will Instagram you when the oven is at a specified temperature. And for the first time in human history, we'll have more vehicles connected to the internet than not. Today, we live in a world where our young people don't believe that they have to go to post-secondary school to get a good job because they can kickstart whatever they want, because we are in the era of makerspace and crowdfunding. So before we can truly implement coding, computer science, and makerspace into the things we're doing in our classroom, we have to hack a few criteria. I use the word hack because I'm a computer science guy and I think it's really hilarious. Number 1, content creation. This is a new thing. All we want is kids creating content at school. Well, then who's going to consume it if there are no more consumers? How about we find the intersection of content regurgitation and content creation and put kids in a place where they can create solutions instead of just finding them? Once we accept that school is just an idea that we've all agreed to follow, the possibilities become limitless. The second hack that I think we have to look at is the notion of embracing failure, because we currently live in a system in which failure is punished. I have a picture of Angry Birds up here because Rovio spent 6 years, and Angry Birds was their 52nd app before they actually made it big. And if you had taken those Angry Birds developers and put them in a high school setting, they would have been asked to repeat the process, and we would have expected different results, which is what Einstein defines as a little bit of insanity. Rovio spent 6 years building apps before any one of them ever took off. So when we talk about embracing failure, I personally believe that there isn't a child out there willing to take a risk because there's too much risk in not getting the grade. The next is the notion of time. Raise your hand if you believe all kids can achieve. I expected that. For so long, time has been the constant at schools. We put kids in isolated settings, we start the timer, and we judge them based on what they produce at the end of that time. Now, that's because we were preparing students for factory line jobs where accuracy quickly was important. If you shut down a line, you were likely to get fired, so that's sort of how we taught at schools. But it's not like that anymore. Every one of you would just put your hands up and said that you believe all kids can achieve. So every one of you just proved that grades become redundant as long as we can scaffold, remove the time constraint, and make grades, tools, and technology the new constant. The other piece is the learning process. For so long, 30% of your mark was that final product, right? We still have exams, we still have exam policies. That's okay, but it can't just be one way to take those kinds of assessments. The last bit I want to talk about is this maker mindset. Maker and computational thinking and coding is a way of thinking. It's not a place, it's not an event. I get emails a lot, what do I need for my makerspace? And I always reply with people. Do I need makey-makeys? I don't know. People. You need people who are prepared to be comfortable with discomfort. I believe all kids should have the opportunity to make, but making doesn't necessarily have to be about technology. I do believe what kids make should be shared with technology to an authentic audience. And here's an example of an impromptu makerspace. Zach Danger Brown was a bit of a jokester, and he took to the internet and he said, I want to make potato salad. That counts, right? That's making. He's never done it before. So he's going to construct his own knowledge of making potato salad by making potato salad for the first time. But he thought it would be fun to get on Kickstarter. And he said, I need $60. I'm going to a party. I want to impress people. If you pledge $5, I will say your name on camera while I make potato salad for the first time. And when you think about it, his kitchen became the fluid impromptu makerspace. Well, the internet loves these kinds of stories. So as you see from the bottom, Zach Danger Brown raised $55,000 to make potato salad, and 6,911 people backed him, because that's the world in which we live, right? True to his word, and because the internet wouldn't have allowed it otherwise, it took him 4 hours to read every name on a live hangout.
Nick Amico, Nick Baker, Nick Brock, Nick Cesari, Nick Chow, Nick Coolahan, Nick D. Clements, Nick DeMorest, Nick Douglas, Nick Gerhardt, Nick Gill, Nick Griparis.
So the kids in my class brought this to my attention, and this is another shift in pedagogy. I used to think I had to know everything there is to know about tools and technology. Now I think I have to know everything there is to know about my curriculum and recognize it. Well, the kids are like, did you hear about this potato salad thing? It's all over the news. I went, yes, and guess what? It's data management time because it's December 1st. I took the Zach Danger Brown story and I turned it into a math lesson, but I didn't want to stop there. I thought, this is fantastic. Everybody is talking about this story. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We looked at graphs, we looked at bias, we tracked things, we looked at AdWords. It was the greatest week of math lessons on the cuff, and everybody was engaged in it. But I also wanted to do it in my literacy program. Well, you know what happens when something goes viral. So we started studying parody.
I have a dream to make bean salad for the first time. But I can't do it myself, no. I'm not in possession of $10. That's why I launched a Kickstarter to make bean salad with Jonathan for the first time.
I've never made bean salad. I don't think I like bean salad. I probably don't. But we'll never find out unless we get this Kickstarter.
Unless you give us our money, or your money, and it becomes our money. And then we can do wonderful things like you pick a bean for us to put in the salad, a type of bean, garbanzo, pinto, black-eyed peas, chickpeas. Or we can Photoshop your head onto our finalized bean salad. And of course, we will be worshiping you verbally on Rigaud this. It's a deal. Help us make it happen. Send us your dollars. Let us fart.
Let us fart.
Did you say send us your daughters? I mean that's okay too, as long as they're not underage.
Recode this.
So green screen was really hot at the time, so we made a lot of parody videos, but the story kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and my lessons kept evolving and evolving and evolving, and they were so authentic. Well, then an interesting part happened, because as with any story that gets big, corporate jumps in.
Zach Danger Brown. We made this potato salad ballad just for you, from one salad lover to another. But it might not be that good. It's our first one. It don't make friends with salad, they say. But Zach Danger Brown proved them wrong today. Suddenly a salad is the main event, 'cause you added some danger to a safe bet. Others may have offered you mayonnaise, but we put our heads together for a better way to say thank you for kickstarting the potato salad craze. We were gonna make a potato salad statue of you, made of potatoes that look just like you. We tried to find one that looked just like you. We couldn't find a potato that looked just like you. We wish there was a king of potato salad, so we could give you the crown. Instead, here's a recipe for danger, for Zach Danger Brown.
Oh, yeah. There it is. There it is. Okay. That's a math lesson. That's a procedure. Get your shoes on. We're going to the grocery store because it's just down the road, and you all have walking forms filled out, and we're going to buy this stuff. We're going to come back to the school, and the kitchen is now our makerspace. Right now, we're all going to make potato salad. I'm going to talk to you about math. We're going to give Kraft some feedback. You're going to change some variables, make different potato salad, just like scratch. See, the notion, mindset of thinking like that is not just about playing in the scratch sandbox. It's about recognizing when you pass the ball to a point guard, there are 15 different variables happening in real time that are always changing. And if your opponent approaches you and your teammate enters into the key when they're running the baseline, well, that's a conditional statement. If this, then do that. Pass the ball quick, else remain. And I've always coached sports through that way. Before we wrap up, because we're just about out of time, I see this a lot. I'm in a one-to-one classroom. I see it in bios. It's written in bios. We are all in one-to-one classrooms. It is not about the device. It's not about the technology. It's about the culture, the community, the rapport, the relationships that we have. Education is a people business. I can still get on and look at my grandfather's house like I did when I was 13 years old, because that's the world in which we live. But today's technology is the worst technology our students will ever use. But I'm so grateful to have it, because guess what? My grandfather passed away in 2010, but he happened to be outside. He happened to be outside in 2009. So I can visit him anytime, anywhere in the world. And I want my students to have that experience. The next time you give a task, think about a newborn that's walking, because when a newborn takes their first 2 steps out of 10 and they fall, we don't say you failed. We say you got 2 out of 10, tomorrow it's 5, and we're going to master walking. And when we're done with that, I'm going to teach you how to run, I'm going to teach you how to rollerblade, I'm going to teach you how to drive. It's about mastery of learning. My name's Brian Aspinall. I believe all kids can achieve if given a fair chance. Thank you.